A massacre in Port-au-Prince. After accusations of witchcraft in a densely populated slum led to violent killings.
December 2024, what began with a sick child ended in a bloodbath when a gang leader ordered the slaughter of voodoo practitioners in Haiti's Cité Soleil. Nearly 200 people were killed. It shocked the world, but it wasn't an isolated tragedy. These are 15 of the most brutal gang wars caught on camera.
Gunfire, stabbings, and vicious beatings as members of what police call criminal gangs waged battle with each other, then turned on police in a restaurant parking lot.
May 17th, 2015. What started as a Sunday meeting for bikers in Waco, Texas, turned into one of the deadliest shootouts in modern U.S. history. Caught on camera for the world to see. More than 200 bikers had gathered that day. Members of the Bandidos, the Cossacks, and their allies were supposed to be talking politics, things like safety laws and riders' rights. But beneath the leather jackets and chrome bikes, old grudges were simmering. For years, the Bandidos had been the dominant motorcycle club in Texas, and they weren't happy about rivals like the Cossacks wearing the Texas patch on their jackets without permission. To someone on the outside, the reason might look petty, but in that world, a patch isn't just decoration. The Texas rocker stitched across the back of a vest is a claim to territory, a way of saying, "This is our ground." On the day of the meeting, the police knew trouble was likely. Nearly 24 officers were stationed outside the restaurant watching closely. Still, when the violence broke out just after noon, no one could stop it. Witnesses say it started with something as small as a parking dispute. Voices rose, a punch was thrown, and then came the gunfire. By 12:24 p.m., chaos had erupted. Security footage later showed bikers diving for cover inside the restaurant, some squeezing into bathrooms and kitchens while shots rang out outside. Patrons in nearby businesses ran for their lives, hiding behind cars as bullets echoed across the parking lot. When it was over, 9 men lay dead and nearly 20 others were wounded. Police later admitted some bikers may have been killed by law enforcement gunfire as officers returned shots from semi-automatic rifles. But the storm didn't end there. What followed was a legal battle unlike anything Waco had ever seen. Officers arrested 107 bikers on the spot, charging nearly all of them with organized crime. Bonds were set at $1 million each, something that critics called arrest them all and sort it out later. Well, it didn't work out. It took over 4 years of trials, mistrials, and delays, but not a single biker was convicted of murder, and eventually, every case was dismissed. The handling of the arrests, mass charges, and conflicting accounts of how much gunfire came from police versus bikers led many to call it a prosecutorial fiasco. Families of those arrested filed civil rights lawsuits, and years later, the event is remembered not just as a deadly gang clash, but also as a massive failure of the justice system. But for Waco, it's still remembered as the bloodiest day since the Branch Davidian siege in 1993. And for the world, it was a chilling reminder that gang wars don't always happen in back alleys. Sometimes they explode right in front of families eating lunch, or, as in our next case, outside what should have been a simple album release party.
Breaking news out of Chicago's River North neighborhood. That's where police say 18 people were shot in a deadly mass shooting overnight.
July 2nd, 2025. Chicago's River North had the kind of summer night you'd expect. Restaurants full, music from lounges. But just before midnight, that buzz was shattered by gunfire. In seconds, the sidewalk outside Artist Restaurant and Lounge turned from celebration to chaos and tragedy. Artist had been hosting an album release party for local rapper Mellow Bucks. Friends, fans, and family were gathered, laughing and celebrating. Around 11 p.m., a dark-colored car rolled past. From inside, shooters opened fire into the crowd. The car then sped away, leaving 18 victims behind. Police later said that as many as 3 people may have been pulling the trigger, as investigators found shell casings from at least 2 different weapons, possibly including a rifle. The attack, they said, was carried out with chilling precision. 4 people didn't make it. 2 men in their 20s were shot in the chest and head. 2 women, just 26 and 27 years old, were struck in the chest and later pronounced dead at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. They had names, families, and futures cut short in seconds. For the rapper Mellow Bucks, the violence was deeply personal. Her boyfriend, Devontae Williamson, was among the dead. She later posted heartbreaking tributes online, writing that they had been inseparable. Police called the attack targeted, possibly connected to gang conflicts, though they didn't confirm motives. Police Superintendent Larry Snelling said, "They didn't care who was struck." The impact didn't end at the crime scene. Artist Lounge, which had once promoted itself as a safe, welcoming spot, was shut down by the city. The owners put out a statement mourning the victims, saying the violence had broken the very mission they had built the place on. And for people living in apartments just steps away, the fear didn't fade overnight. It lingered in the hallways and streets they call home. No arrests have been made, but surveillance cameras caught the attack, marking another reminder of how gang wars can quickly turn moments of joy into scenes of mourning. August 17, 2025, it was just after 3 a.m. in Brooklyn's Crown Heights neighborhood. The Taste of the City Lounge, a nightclub packed with people, was alive with music and chatter. Then, within seconds, it turned into chaos. Gunfire erupted inside the crowded lounge, sending people diving for cover and scrambling toward the exits. By the time the shooting stopped, 3 men were dead, and at least 11 others were wounded. Police later confirmed that 2 of the dead, 35-year-old Jamel Childs and 19-year-old Marvin St. Louis, were actually among the gunmen who opened fire. The third victim, 27-year-old Amadou Diallo, wasn't involved in the dispute at all. He had simply been caught in the crossfire. Surveillance footage helped piece the story together. Childs and St. Louis had spoken briefly inside the club about 10 minutes before the violence. Then St. Louis approached Childs and opened fire. Childs shot back, and within moments, 2 more shooters joined in. In all, detectives believe 4 gunmen were firing into a room full of unsuspecting people enjoying a night out. For those trapped inside, it was pure panic. Witnesses described people crawling across the floor, knocking over chairs, and clutching loved ones as the gunfire continued. When officers arrived, they found victims bleeding from gunshot wounds, as music still played faintly in the background. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch later confirmed the shooting was gang-related. Childs, with 8 prior arrests and known ties to the Folk Nation gang, had only been released from prison in late 2023. Several of the injured were also identified as gang members, but others, like Diallo, were simply out for a night of fun and never made it home.
He's coming to the party to chill with the ladies, smile, dance, have a good time. He's not coming to the party to die.
Mayor Eric Adams addressed the city afterward, pointing out that the tragedy came just a week after another mass shooting, when a gunman stormed a Manhattan office tower, killing 4 people and wounding another. He noted that it was another reminder of how gang rivalries can spill into public spaces and put ordinary lives at risk. He said, "This is the second within weeks, and we don't want this to turn into a normal course of doing business of violence in our city." July 7th, 2025, just after midnight in South Philadelphia's Grays Ferry neighborhood, a summer gathering turned into one of the city's deadliest mass shootings in years. Neighbors had gathered on South Edding Street with music playing, people hanging out, and kids in the crowd. But just before 1 a.m., gunfire tore through the night. By the time it stopped, 3 men were dead and 9 others were wounded. The victims killed were Jason Reese, Zahir Wiley, and Azir Harris. Most of the injured were hit in the arms or legs, but one of them was left fighting for his life after being shot in the head. Police said the shooters sprayed bullets everywhere, even into houses and cars, without caring who they hit. Investigators later found casings from at least 13 different guns, meaning multiple people were firing at once. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Kevin Bethel didn't hold back when he called it, "This is coward, wannabe thug stuff." For families, the pain was unbearable. Azir's father, Troy Harris, said losing his son was like losing a part of himself. Years earlier, Azir was walking with his friends to buy dinner in South Philadelphia when he was shot and left paralyzed in a wheelchair. But he fought his way back, determined to live a full life. His father said he wanted more to life, but this time my boy ain't coming home. In the days after, police arrested 3 suspects, charging them with murder and attempted murder. But with so many guns fired that night, investigators believe others were involved. Philadelphia has worked hard to bring down its homicide numbers, but that weekend was a brutal reminder of how fragile progress can be. In just 4 days, 46 people were shot across the city. In the case of Gray's Ferry, the sound of music and laughter was replaced by gunfire and grief, and the block where neighbors once gathered is now remembered as the site of one of the city's darkest nights.
Led to a massacre in less than 30 seconds.
August 14, 2010, it should have been a night of celebration at the City Grill in downtown Buffalo. A newlywed couple was marking their first wedding anniversary, and about 100 friends and family had gathered for the party. But just after 2:30 a.m., the celebration turned into a massacre. Witnesses said an argument broke out near the end of the night. The restaurant's management decided to shut things down early, asking guests to leave. But as people were making their way out, 23-year-old Ricardo McCrae, a gang member known on the streets as Murder Matt, pulled out a gun and opened fire. The shooting lasted barely 20 seconds, but it was enough to leave 4 people dead and 4 others injured. Among the dead were Willie McCaw, Shawnita McNeil, and her cousin Tiffany Wilhite. Even the groom was killed, turning what should have been the happiest night of his life into a tragedy that shook the entire city. Panic spread through the crowd, with some guests ducking down, while others ran inside or out onto Main Street, totally terrified. One witness said, "Nobody knew where the shots were coming from. Everyone was just trying to get out of the way." At first, police arrested the wrong man, 25-year-old Keith Johnson, before security camera footage cleared him. For days, McCrae was on the run until he eventually turned himself in. 2011, he was convicted on multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Even then, McCrae continued to insist he wasn't the only shooter, though eyewitnesses testified otherwise.
All different. From the sounds, it was more than one out there. Like I told you on the shots, I got low, and that's all I could recall.
The pain for families didn't end there. In 2017, one of the injured victims, Demario Vaz, who had been paralyzed from the neck down in the attack, died after 7 years of struggling with his injuries. His death brought the toll of the City Grill massacre to 5 lives lost. For Buffalo, it was the deadliest shooting the city had ever seen at the time, an attack that revealed the reach of gang rivalries into everyday life. September 22, 2015, Dedrick Mayfield had a long criminal record and gang ties, but on that day, he added something even worse, a daylight shootout at a Denver car wash. By the time it ended, 2 people were dead, and children had narrowly escaped becoming collateral damage. Security cameras captured everything in chilling detail. You can see Mayfield and a friend standing by an SUV inside a wash bay. Then, out of nowhere, a group of rival gang members appeared near the gas pumps. Mayfield motioned for his friend to come out, and almost immediately, gunfire erupted. The footage is as disturbing as it is surreal. In one frame, you can see 2 minors standing near a red car, right in the middle of the line of fire. Someone nearby rushes to pull them into the car just seconds before the shooting intensifies. It's proof of how random and dangerous gang violence can be. Like even kids, just tagging along with their parents, aren't safe. As bullets flew, Mayfield and his friend ducked into the car wash bay, trying to take cover. Another camera angle shows the SUV littered with shell casings as Mayfield fired round after round. His friend was hit by a bullet and was badly injured. Mayfield eventually drove him toward Denver Health Medical Center, but instead of taking him inside, he left him on the street nearby. Strangers rushed the man into the hospital, but it was too late. He died of his injuries, along with a rival gang member who was also shot in the exchange. Investigators later collected 9mm casings from the scene, but the gun Mayfield used was never found. What they did have, though, was crystal clear surveillance footage, evidence that would follow Mayfield into federal court. Already carrying a long rap sheet that stretched back to his teens, including assault, felony escape, and more, Mayfield was indicted by a grand jury in early 2016. He pleaded guilty to being a felon in possession of ammunition and was sentenced to nearly 5 years in federal prison, with 3 years of supervised release to follow. For prosecutors, the case wasn't just about one man's history. It was about the children on camera, the bystanders who almost became collateral damage. As the U.S. Attorney's Office put it, children in Denver should not feel vulnerable to stray bullets in the middle of the day while running errands with a parent or guardian. For years, 2 families in Sydney have been locked in one of Australia's deadliest gang feuds. What started with fistfights and stolen drug shipments eventually spiraled into something much darker, and by 2021, it was taking shape as audacious daylight assassinations. October 20th, 2021, a quiet morning in the Sydney suburb of Guildford was shattered just before 9 a.m. when gunfire echoed down Osgood Street. In broad daylight, father and son Tufik and Salim Hamze were ambushed as they sat in a red utility vehicle. Salim was killed instantly. Meanwhile, his 64-year-old father was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't survive.
Armed with a gun, a hooded man jumps out and runs over to the ute, where he slips over. The gunman fires multiple shots at the pair through the driver's side window.
It was the third and fourth killing linked to the Hamze family in just over a year. And to locals, it felt like another chapter in a gang war that had spiraled out of control. The Hamze clan, led for years by notorious Brothers for Life founder Bassam Hamze from behind prison walls, had been at war with the rival Alameddin family. No one can say for sure how the bloody feud first began, but police link this wave of violence to two events: a brutal street fight where an Alameddin associate was beaten with a metal pole, and a drug run that was allegedly ripped off by the Hamzes soon after. From there, tit-for-tat shootings became the language of both groups. October 2020, Majid Hamze was gunned down outside his Condell Park home. Months later, Bassam's cousin Bilal Hamze was killed in a drive-by in Sydney's central business district after stepping out of a restaurant. Then came the broad daylight attack on Salim and his father, Tufik. Each shooting seemed bolder than the last, and each left police scrambling to prevent the next. Authorities tried to get ahead of the bloodshed. Police leaders promised to keep their foot on the throat of both families. They ramped up raids, surveillance, and extra patrols. Courts even issued strict orders limiting where Hamze associates could go and who they could speak to. But the war didn't stop. Some suspects fled overseas while others kept the cycle alive at home. Even now, the shootings haven't ended. Burned-out getaway cars keep appearing in back lanes, and families keep burying their dead. July 19, 2024, in Playas, Ecuador. Pool halls were the kind of places people went to laugh, smoke, and escape their problems. That was until July 2024, when masked men stormed one and left 9 friends dead. It was one of many reminders that gang violence now reaches even the most ordinary corners of Ecuador. Police later said the group hadn't even been the intended targets. The shooters were chasing someone else, a man who ran into the hall to hide. He managed to escape. The friends didn't. Investigators counted more than 80 shell casings scattered across the floor. It was the kind of attack that left an entire community in shock, wondering how something so ordinary could turn so violently tragic. But they barely had time to grieve. Only a month later, in August, the violence struck again. This time in Santo Domingo, a city west of Quito. Surveillance footage showed masked men firing at the entrance of another pool hall before barging inside. When the gunfire stopped, 7 people lay dead. Pedestrians could be seen in the footage scrambling for cover, the sound of shots echoing through the neighborhood. In Ecuador, these massacres aren't isolated incidents. Once known as one of the region's calmer countries, Ecuador has been pulled deep into the drug trade. Analysts estimate nearly 3/4 of the world's cocaine shipments now move through its ports. Rival gangs, backed by powerful cartels, fight to control those routes, and the violence spills into everyday spaces: beaches, nightclubs, cockfighting arenas, and in this case, pool halls. The government, led by President Daniel Noboa, has declared repeated states of emergency and even a war on gangs, especially after armed men stormed a live television studio, forcing staff to the floor and injuring several people. Soldiers and police have flooded the streets, but even they aren't safe, with many kidnapped by cartel-linked gangs. And despite record cocaine seizures, the killings keep rising. In just the first 5 months of this year, more than 4,000 people were killed, making it the deadliest start to a year Ecuador has ever seen.
Gang members entered a section of this woman's prison where rival gang members were held. Angry relatives want answers after at least 41 people were killed.
June 20th, 2023, inside the Women's Center for Social Adaptation in the town of Tamara, Honduras. Inmates were starting their day when the sound of gunfire and screams erupted. Within minutes, the prison was in flames, and by the time the riot ended, 46 women were dead, shot, stabbed, or burned alive. Investigators say members of the Barrio 18 gang, also known as 18th Street, had smuggled in everything from pistols and assault rifles to grenades. They overpowered the guards and stormed a rival cell block. Gunfire erupted, machetes were swung, and those who survived were locked inside as the attackers poured flammable liquid and set the cells ablaze. When it was over, the walls were blackened and the beds were nothing but twisted metal. The brutality didn't come out of nowhere. Families of inmates said they had been warning for weeks that 18th Street members were threatening others inside, especially their longtime rivals from MS-13. And in Honduras, prisons are already infamous for being overcrowded and gang-run, with guards often bribed or too afraid to intervene. In this case, officials even admitted that some doors had been left open, giving the attackers freedom to move. After the massacre, dozens of relatives gathered at the prison gates and later at the morgue, desperate for answers. Some had spoken to loved ones just days earlier and heard chilling warnings that something was coming. Others never got the chance, but as shocking as the tragedy was, it wasn't completely isolated. Honduras has a grim history of prison disasters, from the 2012 Comayagua fire that killed 361 men, to violent riots that have claimed dozens more in recent years. In 2019, a riot in a men's prison left 40 dead, and in 2020, 6 women were murdered in Tamara prison after pleading to be transferred for their safety. The same prison, the same warnings, and the same patterns, all before the 2023 massacre. Inside these prisons, gangs like 18th Street and MS-13 hold more power than the guards themselves. However, after Tamara, President Castro fired her security minister and promised major reforms. A state of emergency was declared, and the military was ordered to build a new high-security prison on a remote island to hold the most dangerous offenders. But for many, those promises came too late. 46 women were already gone, victims of one of the deadliest prison massacres ever recorded.
Authorities in Mexico say about 50 detainees died after a prison riot in the northeast of the country. Angry relatives gathered outside the Topo Chico facility, notorious for its violence.
February 10, 2016, just before midnight, chaos erupted inside Topo Chico prison in Monterrey, northern Mexico. What began as a fight of dominance between rival gang leaders spiraled into one of the deadliest prison riots in the country's history. By the time it was over, 49 inmates were dead. The violence broke out between two factions of Los Zetas, one of Mexico's most feared cartels. On one side was Juan Pedro Saldivar Farias, known as El Z27, and on the other was Jorge Ivan Hernandez Cantu, alias El Credo. Around 11:30 p.m., El Z27's followers tried to storm Hernandez's cell block. Armed with makeshift weapons including hammers, knives, clubs, and even homemade shivs, they clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Fires were set during the chaos, and it quickly spread through the food storage and cell areas. Video from outside showed flames and smoke billowing into the night sky. Inside, it was even worse. Some men were beaten and stabbed to death. Others were burned in their cells. By 1:30 a.m., federal and state forces finally regained control. But the toll was already devastating. 49 dead, most killed by blunt force or stabbing, and a dozen more badly injured. Families rushed to the gates, pleading for answers as none of them had any idea if their sons or brothers were alive. Authorities were shocked by what they found inside. Topo Chico wasn't just overcrowded. The inmates practically ran it. Guards had allowed contraband to flow freely for so many years. And so, when officials searched the cells, they discovered drugs, TVs, and even luxury suites for cartel leaders, complete with king-sized beds, mini fridges, and saunas. It was less a prison than a cartel compound with walls. Meanwhile, the average prisoner had to pay rent just to have space to sleep, and those who couldn't afford it slept in hallways. Not only that, but corruption was so bad that entire businesses ran inside the prison. There were inmate-run food stalls, a bar, and hundreds of altars dedicated to Santa Muerte, a skeletal saint worshipped by cartel members. In the end, state officials admitted the riot wasn't an escape attempt. It was more of a turf war. just like on the outside. And that exposed a deeper truth, one that people in Mexico had been pointing out for decades. The prisons were overcrowded, corrupt, and never built to contain gangs with that much power.
These photos are all that's left from the massacre of 72 migrants in Mexico. They were mostly Central Americans, crossing Mexico to reach the US.
August 24th, 2010, soldiers in northern Mexico stumbled onto a ranch outside San Fernando, Tamaulipas, and made a horrific discovery. Inside were the bodies of 58 men and 14 women, most from Central and South America. They had been lined up, shot in the head, and piled together. The only reason the massacre came to light was because of one survivor, a boy from Ecuador who had been shot in the neck, but somehow lived to tell the tale. He played dead, then managed to walk to a military checkpoint for help. He said that gunmen from the Los Zetas cartel had intercepted the group, demanded money, and when the migrants couldn't pay, they gave them a choice: work for the cartel as killers or die. They said no, and Los Zetas immediately started shooting. The massacre sparked international outrage. Amnesty International called it part of a wider human rights crisis that had haunted Mexico for years. President Felipe Calderón promised justice, but the killings didn't stop. Just months later, in 2011, San Fernando became the site of another horror. Buses full of passengers were hijacked on the highway. The people were dragged away to safe houses, and they were never seen alive again. When investigators finally dug into the earth, they uncovered 193 bodies, scattered across 47 mass graves. They later discovered that some victims had been forced into gruesome blood sport, where they were made to fight each other with knives and hammers. Those who survived were forced into cartel service. The others were buried in the dirt. The scale of terror was horrifying. Whole buses of migrants heading for the US border simply vanished into the desert. Families in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador kept waiting for calls that never came. And in San Fernando itself, the fear was so overwhelming that thousands of residents packed up and left, desperate to escape the shadow of Los Zetas. Later investigations showed that the truth was even darker than anyone had imagined. The local police were involved, and they weren't just turning a blind eye. They were working with the cartel. Federal prosecutors revealed that officers acted as lookouts, even helping intercept buses and hand migrants over to Los Zetas. Sadly, to this day, many of the victims remain unidentified, and San Fernando is remembered less as a quiet border town than as the site of some of the worst atrocities in Mexico's drug war, where dozens, then hundreds of lives were cut short, simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. October 17, 2019, Mexican forces thought they were carrying out a straightforward raid in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Their target was Ovidio Guzman Lopez, the son of the notorious Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and one of the rising leaders of the Sinaloa cartel after his father's life sentence in the US. They found him. They even arrested him. But within minutes, the city exploded. Hundreds of cartel gunmen stormed into the streets, armed with .50 caliber rifles, grenade launchers, and even armored trucks. Roads were blocked with burning vehicles, and towers of smoke filled the skyline. Innocent people were trapped in the crossfire as gunmen attacked military bases and even threatened the families of soldiers. At one point, dozens of inmates rioted and escaped from the local prison. By the afternoon, the cartel had taken several hostages, and the government made a decision that shocked everyone. They released Ovidio. President López Obrador later said it was the only way to prevent a bloodbath. Yet great damage was already done, and that day became known as Black Thursday. But believe it or not, the fight for Ovidio wasn't over. January 5th, 2023, before dawn, Mexican troops tried again, this time with helicopters, convoys, and months of U.S. intelligence support. They managed to capture Ovidio after hours of heavy fighting. And once again, Culiacan went into chaos. Cartel gunmen set fire to trucks and blocked highways. Businesses were looted. Gunmen even shot at planes on the runway of the city's airport, forcing terrified passengers to duck for cover. The violence spread to nearby towns, and residents were told to stay inside as the battles raged. By the end, 19 cartel gunmen, 10 soldiers, and a police officer were dead. Among them was a colonel and his escorts, ambushed on the highway. But unlike 2019, the government held its ground. Ovidio was flown to a maximum security prison, and later extradited to the United States. But for Mexico, both operations revealed the same truth. The Sinaloa cartel isn't just a gang, it's an entire army. Twice, the arrest of one man was enough to paralyze an entire state and turn its streets into a war zone. March 26, 2022, El Salvador woke up to one of the darkest days in its modern history. In the span of just 24 hours, gangs went on a rampage, randomly killing street vendors, bus passengers, and market goers. By nightfall, 62 people were dead, marking the single bloodiest day since the country's civil war.
In El Salvador these days, there's one murder an hour for a pretty small country, only 6 million people. It doesn't take long when you're, going out at night to stumble upon a scene like this with a body laying dead in the streets.
The next morning, President Nayib Bukele declared a state of emergency. Civil liberties were suspended almost overnight. Police and soldiers flooded neighborhoods, setting up checkpoints, making arrests without warrants, and sweeping up thousands of suspects. What Bukele called a war on gangs quickly became known as the state of exception, and the numbers were like nothing the country had seen before. In the months that followed, more than 85,000 people were detained. Some were hardened gang members, but others were just ordinary men picked up on suspicion alone, sometimes for something as simple as a tattoo or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. By early 2023, nearly 2% of the adult population of El Salvador was behind bars, and the country suddenly had the highest incarceration rate in the world. To handle the surge, Bukele soon revealed his crown jewel, the Terrorism Confinement Center, which is built to hold over 40,000 inmates. It is the largest prison in Latin America. Videos released by the government showed tattooed men being marched in rows, heads shaved, hands cuffed behind their backs, packed tightly into cells. Supporters saw it as justice, while critics saw it as a nightmare of mass incarceration with no sign of rehabilitation. And that's the divide. At home, Bukele's strategy is wildly popular. Polls show over 85% of Salvadorans back the crackdown, with many saying it's the first time in decades they can walk their streets without fear.
Me da mucho miedo salir de noche y ahora pues no nada que decirle. Tranquilamente camino en la noche.
But human rights groups paint another picture, one full of arbitrary arrests, overcrowding, lack of due process, and many deaths happening inside prison walls. Families continue to tell the same stories of loved ones taken away without explanation, court hearings that never come, and bodies quietly returned with no answers.
Y de ahí que nosotros nos dimos cuenta que el régimen de excepción no era únicamente para delincuentes pandilleros, sino que también, al ser mal utilizado, podía llevarse gente inocente.
Bukele didn't care about the criticism and just kept doubling down. To him, the message was simple. The gangs had brought this on themselves. He said, because of your actions, now your homeboys won't see a ray of sunshine. And so, for El Salvador, the events of March 2022 were more than just a spike in violence. They became the turning point for a country long held in the grip of gangs. And now the question is, has El Salvador finally found peace? Or has it traded fear of gangs for fear of its own government?
Let's go down.
July 18th, 2025. It was still early in Zamfara State, northwest Nigeria, when armed men on motorcycles stormed into the Jangebe village. For nearly 2 hours, they went door to door, killing 9 people and dragging more than 100 others away, including women, children, and even the local vigilante leader and his team. By the time the gunfire stopped, the village was emptying after families fled into the bush or to nearby towns, terrified they would be next. Sadly, this wasn't an isolated nightmare. It was the latest chapter in Nigeria's escalating war with the so-called bandits, gangs that began as small-time groups fighting over farmland, but have since grown into heavily armed networks that terrorize the whole country. They burn homes, raid villages, and make kidnappings their most profitable business.
Muna a cikin muna kwana, sai in ga mutanen suka iske mu. Suka iske mu muna kwance muna kwana. Sai muka ji halbe-halben bindigogi ana cewa ga kulawa nan ga kulawa nan.
They've made the north, especially, so dangerous that just traveling by road there feels like a gamble. Farmers can't even tend their fields without paying taxes to the gangs. And parents send their kids to school with a knot in their stomachs, knowing they might not come back, like in 2021, when nearly 300 girls were kidnapped from a boarding school in the same Zamfara region. Between 2023 and mid-2025 alone, over 10,000 people were killed by armed groups in northern Nigeria. Most of them were women and minors. Massacres have wiped out entire villages. In one attack, more than 200 people were slaughtered. In another, 287 boys and girls were abducted from schools in a single day.
Kaga yanzu baki wagga makabarta ita ta dai babba waggana. Kaga nan akwai mutum 25, nan akwai 20, nan akwai 15, nan akwai 9.
Part of what makes this crisis so hard to contain is geography. The bandits hide deep in forests that stretch across multiple states, like the dangerous Zamfara, places the army often can't reach without risking ambush. They also have massive firepower, including assault rifles and even machine guns, often bought with gold mined illegally from the same region. And so, the government's response is often a mix of military raids, airstrikes, and arming vigilante groups. Sometimes those vigilantes succeed, like in June 2025, when they reportedly killed 100 bandits in Zamfara. Other times, they only make matters worse, leading to revenge attacks that leave more civilians caught in the middle. And for ordinary Nigerians, the impact is already devastating without the bloodshed. Food shortages are growing as farmers abandon their fields and families live in fear of night raids. Now, whole communities are packing up and leaving the only homes they've ever known. For them, the sound of motorcycles approaching isn't just noise anymore. It's the sound of war. December 6, 2024, one of Haiti's poorest neighborhoods, Cité Soleil, became the scene of a horror no one there will ever forget. And it all started with a sick boy. Monel Macano Felix, the feared leader of the Wharf Jeremy gang, believed his son's illness was caused by witchcraft. In his mind, local voodoo priests were to blame, and he didn't think twice. His response was terrifying. Over 2 days, Felix sent hundreds of armed men into the streets. They went after the elderly first, men and women in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s, dragging them out of homes, temples, and ceremonies. Some were shot, and others were hacked with machetes. By the time the violence stopped, at least 207 people were dead. Neighbors who tried to protect them didn't survive either. Witnesses described homes set on fire, bodies dumped into the sea, and phones confiscated so word wouldn't spread. It wasn't just a massacre. They tried to erase an entire community of people, and it almost worked. One of the things that made it more chilling was how long it took for the outside world to know. Internet access in gang-controlled neighborhoods is almost non-existent, so news of what happened didn't break until 2 days later. By then, the damage was done. The Haitian government called it an act of unbearable cruelty, and the UN released a report and demanded justice. But in Haiti, where gangs have long controlled roads, ports, and whole neighborhoods, promises of crackdowns feel hollow. For people living there, daily life already feels like a coin toss. You make it or you don't. Simple as that.